across the dinner table to my younger sister for her dream wedding, smiled, and then turned to me. When I asked for a small fraction of that to save my business from a temporary supply chain collapse, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't deserve any help. You chose this stressful path, so drown in it." That was the exact moment something broke inside me. I stood up, walked away, and completely cut contact with my family. They thought I'd be begging on the streets within months. But 3 years later, my sister drove past my new $2 million home, saw my name on the property gate, and called our mom sobbing, "How does she have that?" Follow my story until the end to see the look on their face at the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The funeral flowers of my old life were still fresh when my own flesh and blood decided to destroy my spirit. My name is Cora Bennett, and I am 31 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by a glaring, painful contrast. I was the practical, independent older sister who worked late nights trying to build an e-commerce brand from scratch, while my younger sister, Vanessa, was the golden child. Vanessa didn't need to work hard. She simply had to smile, and our parents would hand her the world. The ultimate breaking point happened on a rainy Tuesday evening during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner. The tension in the dining room was thick, but Vanessa was practically glowing. As we sat around the table, my parents suddenly exchanged a knowing, triumphant smile. My mother reached into her purse, pulled out a crisp, white envelope, and slid it across the table toward Vanessa. With theatrical slow motion, Vanessa slid the paper out. It was a check for $100,000. My parents announced they were completely financing her dream wedding and standard of living, so she could start her new life flawlessly. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just days prior, I had practically begged my parents for a temporary microloan of just $5,000 to keep my struggling business afloat during a supply chain crisis. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a temporary lifeline. Yet here they were, smiling warmly, handing her an absolute fortune. I stared at the check, the numbers blurring before my eyes as Vanessa squealed and threw her arms around our mother. The contrast was suffocating. I cleared my throat, my voice barely a whisper. "So Vanessa gets $100,000 for a single party, but you couldn't help me save my livelihood?" The warmth instantly vanished from my mother's face, replaced by a cold, judgmental sneer. She leaned across the table, looking me dead in the eye. "Vanessa is building a real life, Cora. You're wasting your time on a failing little internet hobby. You don't deserve a single cent of our hard-earned money because you don't deserve any help. You brought your failures on yourself." My father just nodded in agreement, cutting his steak, without even looking up at me. Vanessa didn't say a word. She just sat there, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips as she carefully tucked the check back into its envelope. In that exact moment, something shifted inside me. The crushing grief and the desperate need for their approval that I had carried for 31 years suddenly withered away, replaced by an absolute, icy clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I slowly pushed my chair back, stood up from the table, and looked at the three people who were supposed to be my family. "I understand completely," I said softly. I turned around, walked out of their house, and closed the door behind me, knowing I would never step foot in it again. The very next morning, I went completely ghost. I didn't send a long, dramatic text explaining my absence, nor did I give them a final warning. I simply opened my phone and blocked their numbers, their social media accounts, and their email addresses. I cut the cords completely. If I didn't deserve their help, then they no longer deserved access to my life. To keep my business from going under, I had to make brutal sacrifices. I sold my minor assets, backed out of my apartment lease, and moved into a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a rough part of town. My bed was a mattress on the floor, and my desk was a cheap folding table. For months, my life consisted of nothing but 16-hour workdays. I survived on cheap every ounce of my pain, anger, and humiliation into a brand new strategy. Instead of letting their rejection destroy me, I used it as absolute fuel. I completely restructured my e-commerce brand, pivoting away from domestic suppliers and building direct international partnerships. I worked through the exhaustion, completely isolated from the toxic family network that had weighed me down for decades. Every time my hands shook from tiredness, I remembered my mother's cold sneer and my sister's smug smirk. I didn't want revenge. I wanted total, undeniable success. I was entirely on my own, climbing a mountain out of the darkness. By the end of the second year, the grueling hours and ruthless focus began to pay off in ways I had never imagined. The new international supply chain structure didn't just save my e-commerce brand, it caused it to explode into massive profitability. Orders were pouring in faster than my automated systems could process them. I went from barely surviving in that cramped studio apartment to managing a highly lucrative corporate enterprise, quietly accumulating a massive fortune. While my old family network undoubtedly assumed I was drowning in poverty and regret, I was building a life of absolute luxury in complete secrecy. I didn't post my success on social media, and I didn't buy flashy clothes to show off. Instead, I made a major, calculated move. I purchased a stunning, ultra-modern estate in one of the city's most exclusive, gated neighborhoods. The property, valued at a breathtaking $2 million, was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and manicured stone. Stepping out onto my balcony each morning, looking at the sprawling lawns and the peaceful horizon, I felt a profound sense of calm. The silence was beautiful. I was completely free from the sympathy that had poisoned my youth. I had built an absolute empire out of the rubble of their rejection, and the best part was that they had absolutely no idea it existed. I was a ghost living in a paradise of my own making. The ultimate situational reversal began on a bright Saturday afternoon, exactly 3 years after I had walked out of that suffocating dinner. I was standing in the beautifully manicured driveway of my $2 million estate, reviewing some business metrics on my phone while waiting for my landscape architect. The neighborhood was exceptionally quiet, the kind of exclusive district where privacy is heavily guarded and luxury is standard. Suddenly, a mid-range sedan turned down my street, driving slowly as if the occupants were looking at the local real estate. As the car crawled past my security gates, the passenger window rolled down. My eyes locked with the person inside, and the world seemed to stop. It was Vanessa. She looked exhausted. The youthful glow she once carried completely drained away. I later learned that the $100,000 our parents handed her had been entirely squandered on a single day of vanity, a lavish wedding that did nothing to fix the financial strain and constant arguments brewing in her marriage. She and her husband were scouting more affordable areas nearby, completely unaware that I lived in the elite sector just over the hill. Vanessa's jaw dropped as she recognized me. She stared at me, then at the sprawling modern mansion behind me, and then back at me standing there in a tailored blazer, looking calm, successful, and entirely at peace. The undeniable proof of my massive wealth was staring her right in the face. I didn't wave, and I didn't smile bitterly. I simply held her gaze with icy indifference as her husband stepped on the gas, speeding away from the gates of my paradise. Vanessa didn't even make it out of my neighborhood before she pulled the car over, her hands shaking violently as she grabbed her phone. She frantically dialed our mother, bursting into hysterical tears the second the call connected. She was sobbing so loudly her voice cracked over the speaker, screaming into the phone. How does she have that? Mom, you don't understand. Cora is living in a literal palace. Within hours, the fragile illusion my parents had built completely shattered. The realization that the daughter they had branded a failure was now vastly more successful than anyone else in the family sent them into absolute panic. Suddenly, the 3 years of silence didn't matter. The fact that they had explicitly told me I didn't deserve a single cent of help was conveniently forgotten. Because their phone calls and texts were still thoroughly blocked, they resorted to flooding my corporate email and sending certified letters to my business address. The tone of their messages had completely shifted from cold arrogance to a desperate, synthetic family love. My mother wrote long, rambling paragraphs about how much she missed her eldest daughter, claiming that the dinner confrontation was just a giant misunderstanding. My father begged for a meeting, hinting that the family needed to stick together during tough financial times. It was a masterclass in toxic regret and shameless greed. They didn't miss me. They missed the money, they realized I had. I watched the messages pile up on my screen, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, unshakable sense of triumph. I decided to grant them one final, brief public meeting, strictly to give them closure on my terms. We met at a quiet upscale cafe downtown. As I walked in, my parents and Vanessa were already seated, looking pale, anxious, and completely stunned by my presence. They looked at me with the exact same wide eyes Vanessa had in the driveway, fully mirroring the power dynamic from 3 years ago. Before my mother could launch into another synthetic, tearful apology, or my father could ask for financial assistance, I raised my hand and stopped them coldly. I looked them all dead in the eye and told them they were completely and permanently barred from my life, my home, and my fortune. I explained that by turning their backs on me when I was at my absolute lowest, they had unintentionally given me the ultimate gift. They taught me exactly how to survive, build, and conquer without them. I stood up, left enough cash on the table to cover the coffee, and walked away into my beautiful, independent future, never looking back. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you ever forgive a family that cast you out like that? And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you.